Good morning, everyone. I'm Rebecca Randall, the Senior Vice President of Partnerships and Regional Growth for Common Sense. I'm so glad to bring us all together for this conversation, which is part of a national series of common sense conversations that usually happen in our regional offices across the country. But when the pandemic struck, we immediately pivoted to hosting them virtually. We're tapping into our favorite experts who offer real-time advice about solving some of the dilemmas you may be experiencing at home right now, one of which may be navigating how much media and technology our kids are using. Because if your kids are anything like my 10-year-old, their screen time use has skyrocketed over the past 8 weeks. And that's really where Common Sense comes in. As some of you may know, we're a national nonprofit dedicated to helping families and educators harness media and technology as a positive force in kids' lives. And never really has our work seemed more critical. We have tons of resources to help both families and educators find great content to get you through the very long days at home, as well as online resources that we have curated on both our site as well as at Wide Open School, a new collection of free resources to really help you keep your kids learning, engaged, and entertained at home during the crisis. Because depending on the day, or even just the moment, that's often what it can feel like as a parent, especially juggling work and my son's schooling. I feel incredibly fortunate that he's generally post the tantrum stage and can be relatively self-sufficient during the day. I'm also lucky that my husband is sharing some of the workload, which I know isn't true for everyone. I also know that it's been really hard for parents of young kids right now. But no matter what our kids' age may be, being stuck at home is leading to some major behavior challenges for kids, and let's face it, for grown-ups as well. But while it may not feel like it, this also presents some unique opportunities as well as challenges. That's why I asked my colleague and my friend, Ellen Galinsky, to join us. She's going to shine some light on how we can use these challenging circumstances that we're all going through to help our kids develop some really important life skills. Ellen is the Chief Science Officer at the Bezos Family Foundation, where she also serves as the Executive Director for the organization Mind in the Making. In addition, she's a Senior Research Advisor for the Society for Human Resource Management and the founder and president of Families and Work Institute. Talk about juggling a lot of different things. Ellen is a master at it. Before we get started, let me give a short overview of what you can expect on the call. You're on mute because we have lots of people on the webinar, but you do have the ability to ask questions of Ellen. If you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat icon. Press that and you'll be able to type in any kinds of questions. My colleague, Lisa Solomon in Los Angeles and Aurora Caston in the Bay Area are going to be monitoring the chat during the session. We'll then turn to discussion questions near the end of the session at about the half-hour mark. And my colleague, Melanie Strauss, will be sharing information and resources with you throughout the conversation in the chat box. So if you're looking for any of the resources or links to some of the content that Ellen mentions or that I may bring up, check the chat box and we'll have it in there for you. If you can't stay for the full time, don't worry about it. We'll be posting this video online so you can see it and review it in the future. We'll also keep you informed about some of the other webinars that we're going to be hosting over the next few weeks and over the course of the pandemic. Okay, so let's get started. And Ellen, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the term forever memories, which is an idea that you really coined and I love. I've spent quite a bit of time wondering and worrying about recently what kinds of memories my son is going to take away from this period of time. So can you talk about that idea and share how as parents and as educators we can be more intentional about creating the memories we want our kids to take from this time?
Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca. And I'm thrilled to be with you all. And I'm so proud of what you are doing and particularly Wide Open School. It's just such a godsend to families and children right now. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, forever memories came to me when I realized that this was a time in my life like when Kennedy was shot, or after 9/11, or any of the major events, that we're going to be asking each other for days, for weeks, for generations to come, what were you doing during this pandemic? What was being isolated at home like for you, and how were you managing it? And our kids are going to remember it. And it then occurred to me that we want to be more intentional about it. And that's hard because we are, as you say, trying to work at home. If we've never done that, we've got kids. If we've got little kids, they're trying to figure out school. There's a grieving process for giving up their friends and school at school to now what is school at home. Some of them have it better, some of them have it worse. And so how do we do that? And I began to collect stories of people, and I hope all your listeners will get in touch with me to share their stories. There's a comment section at the bottom of the website to be able to add your stories, or to tell me how to contact you, and I'll interview you. I began to collect stories of what families were doing to create the kinds of memories, the intentional kind of memories they will want their children or their families to have, because this is about managing work and family life. It's about people who are at home alone, not just with children, or about people with children. Here's some examples. One is a mother who, she's actually a grandmother and a mother, who was quite worried about everything that was going on. Her husband is going to work every day. He's an essential worker. So even though they're in a farm in the middle of the country, she was worried what was coming in and out of her house, and would her family and her husband, of course, be safe. But what she also realized was that she was cocooned with her family, and she probably never have another time like that, 3 generations living together on a farm. So they took their calendar, they erased it. It had been looked like something at Grand Central Station, with everyone coming and going. They had different color coding for who was going where in terms of work and family life all week. They erased it, and they come up with an activity every day with their grandchildren that they would especially like to do. It's what we used to call in my family special time, but it's special time right after work for her. And they can be very simple things. It's not what they're doing that matters. It's that the whole family is focused on them. So they do coloring, or they do, they made Play-Doh till they realized that they should conserve flour and shouldn't waste flour for that. All kinds of things like that, special stories, or things, dressing up. Being fairies. One of the special things that they did was to draw rainbows, because they know that children all over the world are drawing rainbows and putting themselves on a map. So they drew rainbows, and that would become a forever memory, where they could put their farm in the middle of the country on that map. So that's a wonderful thing that they're doing every day with their family. Another mother realized that her child, as I said, was grieving. That she tried to create a schedule, and her child was having none of it. She was pushing back like crazy. And it took a friend to say to her, wait a minute, it's like if the dog died and you tried to substitute another dog without telling her. You're trying to create school at home when you haven't even grieved the loss of school at school. So she gave her daughter a time to talk about how she was feeling, and that for her was her forever memory. And they're now close to a dozen forever memory stories, and I hope you will share yours.
That's great. I really hope that my son doesn't remember the day I actually forgot to bring him lunch, and instead, focuses on some of the things we've actually been doing together. So, Ellen,
funny story, Rebecca.
Well, yeah, it happens.
It does happen.
Fortunately, he's old enough that he figured it out himself, but it wasn't the most nutritious thing, but at least he was fed. Among kind of all the many things that you've done, one of my favorite is a book that you wrote called Mind in the Making, the 7 Essential Skills Every Child Needs. What are some of the lessons from Mind in the Making, and what do you mean by life skills that could help parents these days?
I just noticed in the chat that a mother wrote with some issues that she's facing, like putting her child is having trouble going to sleep. Please keep writing these. I hope that everyone who's listening, and we've got a really big group now, will write down the way you think that things have changed now, because I'm actually planning to do a study on how this period will bring changes in our lives, and that will start by being informed by all of you. So please use the chat box, and I hope, Rebecca, we can save this so that I can read it later and not focus on it now. Mind in the Making started with a question, and all my research has started with a question. The question was, what are we doing to take the fire that children are born with in their eyes for learning? Children are born learning. They're born wanting to see, to taste, to touch, to experience everything, to understand the world and how it works. If you go to older children, studies show that about 40 to 60% lose that engagement in learning. So what are we doing to turn that off? That became a question 20 years ago now, really. And I began by going out to look at some of the best research on engagement in learning and what learning actually is with children birth through 8. And midway through that journey of going out and actually filming the best research, because I took a camera crew with me, and filming it, I began to discover that there are these, what I think of as essential skills. They're based on executive functions of the brain, and some of you may have heard that word. That means that we're using our memory, we're thinking flexibly, and we're not going on automatic, but we're doing what we need to do to achieve a goal. These are always goal-driven processes, bringing together our social and emotional and cognitive capacities to achieve goals. I realized that even though they didn't call it that, even though it was very different in different disciplines, the studies of children thriving were those who the families were promoting these life skills or executive function based skills. And I thought that has to be a book. So I began writing, and it's exactly 10 years ago today, not today, last Friday, that Mind in the Making came out. It was really a milestone for me because it's just had this wonderful life of its own. For example, now creating online training with it. And we've trained 100,000 people around the country in what are the essential life skills like focus and self-control. So what are they? Families let me give an example. Feeling like you should be your child's teacher is something that some of us are struggling with. When you're struggling with that, you realize, go back and look at what your expectations are and ask yourself whether those are realistic or not. One mother, I just posted a few minutes ago, realized that she could not create a whole educational curriculum for her young children at home, but that what she could do was to give them time and attention, and make sure that she wasn't too stressed out most of the time. That was what she could do for her children. So it's coming to terms with our expectations and seeing if those are realistic or not. But it's also promoting those life skills in children. And you gave the example of kids their screen time is way up. And I think we're all giving our kids more leeway right now for more screen time. But I'll tell you what we did in our family with screen time. My grandson, who's 7, was pretty addicted to it. This is pre-COVID. And it was, he would be cranky when it was time to put it away. So it wasn't just that people thought, well, it was too much. It was that he would just get so cranky when it was over. So we did the process that we often do with children. We helped him. We set the rule, that is, you're going to have to stop it. We then asked him what ideas he had. So we used his own ideas to come up with solutions. How, when it's time to give it up, could you do this? What ideas do you have? We made a big list of them. We looked at what would work and what wouldn't work about those ideas. And he then had to use the skill of perspective taking to see how it would work for the rest of the people in his family as well as for him, and then come up with one to try. And he thought of what he loves to do besides he's actually learning programming now, besides being on the computer. And that would help him make that transition. So he was learning the skill of focus and self-control. He was learning how to set a goal and achieve it. And we were using what we call autonomy supportive strategies to help him not fix the problem for him, but help him fix it for himself.
So, switching tracks just a teeny bit, you've been writing a lot, I think, especially recently about like what researchers, call a trauma-informed perspective, because certainly, like I said earlier, like we're in crisis, a lot of families are in trauma. Can you talk about what this actually means? So, bring it down to something that we can all understand, and how it relates to sheltering in place?
Well, I think understanding that really adverse experiences can have an effect on children has been a real gift that the people who have focused on this have given us. But and I'll give you a post to put up later about this where I've written about it. But I think the important thing is not to look at what's wrong, but to look at what's right. I talked before about autonomy supportive strategies. That's helping children learn to have skills to fix problems for themselves rather than adults fixing them. This is rather than seeing what's wrong, seeing what's right. It's what Aaron Ramsey and I at the Bezos Family Foundation call an opportunity mindset. That's important because I'm just doing a survey for a book I'm writing on adolescence, and I found that among parents of teenagers, only 40% of them say that they, and this is self-report, this is what they say they do, look at what their children are doing right versus what their children are doing wrong. If we do look at what's right, we build on what's right, we're much more likely to get it. It's what we called in a curriculum we developed with Mount Sinai, positive opposites. So looking at what's right rather than what's wrong. If your child is getting off of that computer or that iPhone just one time, instead of saying all the things that they did wrong, say the one thing that they're doing right and build on it. How did you do that? I know that's hard for you. What worked about that? So most of the best therapies, most of the best recovery strategies focus on what's going well. And I think if we can do that, that will help us all thrive.
What else can we do to help kids shore up their life skills during this period and deal, you mentioned this earlier, and deal with some of the collective grief that we're all trying to navigate?
Well, like the mother who realized that her child was grieving and that's why she was resisting the schedule, the first thing is to acknowledge that it's hard and then say what we as a family really try to deal with hard things. I do call that the skill of taking on challenges. When we make a plan to overcome something that's hard, there's a lot of discussion in the literature about resilience, and it's like you're one of those dolls that you knock over and it just bounces up. That's not the way the real world works. We have to get back up on our own feet and try something that's hard. And so with Mind in the Making, we spend a lot of time at helping people take on challenges. And one of them is a mindset that you can grow and change. That's what Carol Dweck and her research would call a growth mindset versus you're born with whatever you're born with and that's it. And then there's the opportunity mindset, which is we can find what's good and build on that versus what's wrong. So the example of grieving about what's going on, say as a family, there are things that are harder. We're having to tighten our belts. We're not able to go out. We're not able to play with friends. What are each of us going to do to make things better for ourselves? The mother that whom I was telling you about, who was really struggling with managing work and family life, realized that the one thing that she could do was to get outside a lot, that she needed the outside and the sunshine. She's lucky that she, as opposed to people who live in New York City, near where I live, who really can't let their kids go out and play. She could go outside, and that helped her a lot. The other thing that she could do was to change her expectations, that she would accomplish everything that she had accomplished before at work, and realize that she could accomplish what was most important, but not everything. By focusing on what was most important, she just wrote me this morning that she's accomplished more than she ever thought she would. So taking away the clutter and focusing on what's most important. So help your children and you come up with plans for what's most important and how can you do it. And see this as a skill. See it as taking on challenges. That's the way that you're going to be able to we're all going to be able to manage this.
Great. I'll try to take that and focus more on the fact that my son got himself lunch, and then the fact that I forgot to give it to him one day.
So for himself, Rebecca.
Exactly. Self-sufficient. Taking control. So kind of bringing it back, to really to parenting. You have a matrix on the 6 stages of parenting and parenthood, and kind of how has that, if at all, shifted of what's going on? I mean, has the normal course of parenting changed? And how does it kind of slow up or speed down or speed up, the natural progression?
I don't think that the normal course of parenting has changed, except for in what I used to call the departure stage. They're not departing, they're coming home. My grown children, my grown son and his wife are living here. And actually, I love being in a 2-generational house. I talked about the family who was living on a farm in a 3-generational family. We're a 2-generational family right now. And that in our case is quite wonderful. But in my neighborhood, if it's any example, again, I'll do a study and see how true this is. But in my neighborhood, pretty much a lot of the grown children are back at home because they don't, we live in the country, and so it's a nicer place to be in quarantine. The challenges, though, are still the same. So when your children are, let's say what I call the autonomy stage of, no, I'm little and I can do it for myself, those toddlers, those preschoolers saying, I can take care of myself. We're still going to have to come to terms with how we discipline them. But the lesson in parenthood is the same across the life cycles, which is, and I talked about it a little bit before, it's if we're stuck, if we're feeling guilty, guilt is actually a useful emotion. I mean, I know that is not a popular thing to say, but I've always found that it's like a fever. It will tell you that there's something wrong, and then you have the chance to address it. So if you're feeling guilty, ask yourself, what did I do that didn't meet my expectation? In your case, it was not giving your child lunch. My expectation is I'll take care of him and give him lunch, and then ask if that's a realistic expectation. Maybe it isn't. Maybe he could begin to help getting himself lunch. Or maybe it is. You still want to be able to take care of him in that way. But it's changing your expectation to come to terms with either reality, I want to live up to this expectation, or it's not realistic and I need to change my expectation. That's the basis of growth in parenthood. So that lesson stays the same from my book, The 6 Stages of Parenthood.
Mm-hmm. And so what about for, the kind of the participants with really young children, right? The reality of it is increased tantrums and aggression, while they're trying to navigate everything. Beyond kind of letting ourselves sort of like take a break and not feel guilty, how can we best really work with our kids on some of these issues? And, maybe a concrete example on your kids having a tantrum. What now? What do you do?
Well, I want you all to go to what's called Skill Building Opportunities on the Bezos Family Foundation's Mind in the Making website, because we have 100 such problems with real strategies to turn these into skill building moments. Let's take the temper tantrum. At the moment, the best that you can do is to try to not fight back with your child, not get angry, but to say, you're very angry, you can't hit me, or you can't hit your sister, you can't throw every sheet and pillow in the house on the floor. We're going to have to clean it up, but let's just wait till you calm down. When then for you, it's a matter of looking at what triggers the tantrums. Is your child hungry? Is your child tired? Is it too much? Are you tense so your child is reacting off from you? What's going on? Did someone in their classrooms online say something mean? What triggered the tantrum? Because their behavior is always a communication. There's always a reason that it happens and something triggers it. Then in a calm moment, say to your child, and I would say starting at 3 or 4 up, you didn't like it and I didn't like it when you had that temper tantrum. Let's figure out another way to manage it. And then say, what ideas do you have when you're getting really angry, so that we don't end up with everything thrown on the floor and you screaming and my getting angry and frustrated and so forth. Let's come up with plans and go through that same problem solving process again, which is writing down the problem, writing down all the solutions, as dumb as some of them may sound, that your child suggests and that you suggest, and then coming up with one to try, looking at what would work and what wouldn't work about each of those suggestions, and then coming up with one to try and say, this is a trial, let's see if it works. In your case, it may be trying to get in ahead of the tantrum and seeing that if you don't give snacks every 2 hours, having maybe a cart out with snacks that your children can take themselves rather than you having to have food for them. But this is a time, what parents are telling me is that because of all this closeness, this is a time where we can address some of these issues. We can be more intentional, not only about our forever memories, but about our kids' temper tantrums, and do the kind of parenting that we actually want to do. If not now, when?
We're getting a lot of questions that are coming in, I think that get to some concrete takeaways. That was really helpful, I think, from a tantrum perspective. I have two more. One is, how do you navigate sleep and getting your kids to sleep, particularly when they may themselves be stressed out? So let's start with that, and then we'll move on to sibling rivalry and aggression.
Well, we do have a skill building opportunity tip sheet on sleep, so go there and look it up. I hope that it's helpful. Sleep. Sleep is something that is very necessary for reasons that we understood, such as restoration. When we're rested, we're just going to function better. But it's also critical, as I'm looking at the research on adolescence, in learning. And so when you're asleep is when you consolidate your memories. And that really affects your learning, your ability to take what you've learned that day and consolidate it into a memory. So sleep becomes even more critical than we had thought. Sleep is also cultural. Some families say kids should never be in their beds, and some families say co-sleeping is fine. That's a cultural aspect that can differ for families. But one thing is that I think you need to do is to begin to wind down for sleep. That is, have rituals or traditions in your family that help know that it's bedtime. Story time is often a wonderful time for winding down, even with grown children. I've thought, because my family used to read stories at night, didn't watch television but read stories when I was growing up. I've thought that this is a great time for family stories again, even with grown children. Pick something that you want to read and escape into someone else's world. Would be a wonderful thing. So a wind down activity. And then if your child is old enough, help your child know what helps him or her go to sleep. Maybe it's reading in bed. Maybe it is my son used to have nightmares, and so he made a sword. When I did the problem solving process with him, he created a sword that he put by his bed. It was made out of cardboard and aluminum foil. But when he was a preschooler, it helped him. My daughter never wanted the light out. So we got fish in her room because she didn't want to be alone. And we can't go out and do that right now, but some little night light if you have it. And maybe it's staying with your child till your child goes to sleep. Maybe you're going back to some earlier ways that you helped your child go to sleep before. But getting angry and upset about it, even though it's obvious that we want to do that, doesn't really help because we don't sleep very well, and sleep is not as restful if we're very anxious. So trying to find a way to calm down, to not get your expectations crazy. It may be the one time you have alone, so you really want them to go to sleep so that you can recover yourself from the day. But if we stress about it, we're then compounding the problem. Rebecca, I can't hear you. You may have gone on mute.
Siblings too can compound the problem, right? Like, I feel fortunate some days that I have an only child at home, and then not so fortunate because he doesn't have a play date the rest of the time. But for my friends and, for one of the participants, sibling kind of infighting is a very real thing. So, for younger kids too, where, parents need to be more engaged, how can you navigate that with that mindset of, thinking more positively?
Well, again, understand that behavior is always a communication. And if you can, look and see when your kids are going to get into a fight. And sometimes it can be tricky. I'll give an example from my own family here. My son used to do little sneaky things to trigger his sister off. And then she would do something very obvious. And then she would be the one who would, get into trouble. Why did you hit him? When actually he had triggered it. So it took really careful watching, because she couldn't tell me that at that stage, to see that it actually was a two-way street, and it usually is a two-way street. So figure out what's going on, and if you can address that by looking at what's going on. Give your children other ways to express feeling angry, using words, saying how you think, saying what you will and won't do. If coming up with a family meeting. I notice that you always fight at this particular time. Let's have a family meeting so that we can figure out what to do instead of fighting. Again, I'm going back to autonomy supportive practices, but the reason I'm going back to them is because they're instrumental in developing executive functions. And executive functions are, studies find, as if not more important than IQ in whether each of us and our children thrives. So executive functions, life skills are, in the way that I define them, are really critically important. So have that family meeting, come up with a plan, try it, don't expect it to work forever, but notice the little effort that each of your children are making, helping them identify feelings and know other ways to express them, making up stories about kids who had fights. If you don't, can't find one online or one to read to your children, making up stories and say, what do you think these children should do about that? So if they can't deal with it on a first person basis, if they can't step back and reflect on their own feelings, help them think about it in a fly on the wall perspective, looking at this through a story. Studies on emotional regulation find that taking that fly on the wall perspective is critically important to being able to manage stressful moments.
So I feel like we're all still working on life skills, both supporting our kids as well as growing our own. You are, you're the co-founder of the Families and Work Institute, also premier researcher for women in work. And, one of our participants had a question about working full time. I'm in the same boat and trying to spend time with our kids. And I know that you guys just put out a report on flexibility in the workplace. And if you can shed any light on how we can deal with that flexibility in the workplace and spending time with our kids now.
Yeah, we have done studies on flexibility since 1992. So for a long time, this is something that I know very well. And what we did, Stacy Kim and Ipshita Pal and I did, was to go back to our data. We have a nationally representative data set of the U.S. workforce, and we went back and we asked pandemic questions, which was quite wonderful. What makes the difference in whether people thrive when they're working flexibly or not? We knew that from our data over years that there are penalties for working flexibly, that people, it's although if you go back to long ago history, there was always flexibility, but now after the industrial age, there was sort of a notion that you work at work, and you segment your work life and your family life. So what did we find mattered most? We found that the way your supervisors and your coworkers treat you in working flexibly, do they support you? Are they respectful? Do they trust that you're working? Was more important than whether or not you have permission, so to speak, to work flexibly, whether it's okay. I mean, we all have permission now because it's the only way we have to work. So that's really important. Support for flexibility matters hugely in your health, in your depression, in your managing work and family life. So remember, turning that around, I channel Fred Rogers, who was a friend of mine. He talked about one kind word, saying one kind word. So when you start that call with a coworker, one kind word about how are you doing? How are you managing? I know it's hard. What have you learned to do this? In one study that colleagues of mine did, that one kind word from a boss made a difference in people's physical health, if you can believe it. It's really important. The other thing is support for your own health. I know that we have that where I work, but we have support for each other in the way we're working, and we have support for our own health. But feeling that you can live in a healthy way is critically important to your being able to live in a healthy way. So it's the expectations of others and how we treat each other. We ended up titling our report, which you can, it's very short. I hope you'll go get it at the Families and Work Institute's website, familiesandwork.org. It's called One Kind Word in honor of Fred Rogers.
Great. And how, I mean, so there's the policy piece, there's how we interact with our colleagues, but what about our kids? So how can we spend more time with our kids, and particularly for kids who may resent, that we're working? What kinds of concrete takeaways do you have for us to have those kinds of conversations with our kids directly?
I think if you can set up some time that you know you're with your kids and it's really their time, their special time, so that if they have to wait because you're on a phone call or you have a deadline, they can manage it. I'm not talking about infants and toddlers. I'm talking about, from preschool age on. They can manage, and you can say when you're working, you don't like to be interrupted. It's hard for you if you get interrupted. If you're really focusing on that Lego that you're doing or whatever it is you're doing, you don't like being interrupted. And I can't, it's hard for me if I get interrupted, but I will be with you if you say when you will be with them and you really focus on them. If you can really then switch off work at that moment and focus on them, that is what's really important. Then they can manage the time when you're not working. And you just share the feelings. It's frustrating for me and it's frustrating for you when I can't be with you. I know with my grandson, and my daughter and I are still working on this because he's not with us sadly right now, setting up a regular time, because when he calls me, sometimes I'm on a call and it's very frustrating to him. So we're trying to figure out a time every day when I really can be with him. If we can set up that time and then share our feelings about how we're feeling. The mother who I just posted today about working at home said that she realizes now that she's giving her children better attention than she did before. Once she let go of her, I have to do everything all at the same time, kind of crazy making expectations of herself. Again, growth is letting go of expectations and finding expectations that are more productive. She's finding that she's being more productive with work, as I said, but she's also being a better mother. Great. Also, she gets up at 5 o'clock to exercise. So, taking care of yourself if you can is really important. Whatever it is, each of us is different, but finding some way to take care of yourself.
Right. So let me ask kind of one last question. I'll combine two participants' questions and then we'll wrap up. For kids that are older, and this is aging down too. So we're even talking about first, second graders in many cases that now have devices because of remote learning. How do you keep them focused and on task and not kind of playing games or chatting with their friends, or frankly, like, should they be engaged in that kind of playtime right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think each of us needs something that we really love to do. And for my 7-year-old grandson, it's Minecraft. He loves Minecraft. So that's great. I mean, so take that passion that they have, instead of seeing it as an evil. It's all bad. Screen time, all bad. It's not all bad. There are things that college students are now doing using Minecraft to recreate their campuses when they can't be there. So we took that passion that he has for Minecraft and turned it into something that he can learn about. We deepened it, we extended it, we scaffolded it, to use the educational world. If you go on back to Forever Memories, you'll read a story called Hope Brings Hope. And Hope is a junior in California in high school who realized that her teacher's kids were suffering during the pandemic. So she and her friends, and now it's gotten much bigger, have gotten together to tutor kids online and whatever interests them, to bring joy in learning for the kids of her teachers, and now, well, in my case, for my grandson. We found a great tutor named Sarah who's teaching him programming now. He's learning how to make those wings and those swords in Minecraft even stronger, and he is off the wall excited. So find the good in it and build on it. Make sure that each child has something that he or she loves during the day to do that can give them relief, like maybe it's reading a magazine or watching something junky on television for us, or calling a friend and gossiping, or whatever it is or exercising that gives us renewed energy. And then balancing that out with this time for school, and understanding that teachers are figuring it out. So the school is, for some kids, uneven. Parents are figuring it out, so it's uneven for us as well. And just seeing each day what we can do to make things work. We call our work at the Families and Work Institute making work work, and that's an everyday process.
Any one last takeaway?
One last takeaway is back to the first question you asked me, which is, what forever memories do we want from this? Even if awful things have happened to us, what forever memory can we have. I know in our small work group, one of my beloved colleagues lost her father during this crisis, and they're focusing on creating the biggest blowout celebration they can when things are when we can all be together to celebrate this incredible man. So focusing on what we can do and to have the life we want.
Great. Ellen, thank you so much. I think that is, it for us today, but let's offer a big round of applause virtually for Ellen for spending her time with us this morning, or I suppose afternoon in your case. We've been posting things throughout the discussion in the chat. Please be sure to check out those great resources for Ellen, as well as Wide Open School and the Common Sense site. And also join us next week if you're interested in learning more about fostering happiness. We'll be joined by Yale professor Laurie Santos. And if you're finding these discussions and our content helpful and you're in the position to do so, we'd love for you to consider making a donation to Common Sense. Again, we're a nonprofit, and any amount, $2 to $25 or more counts, and we'd be ever so grateful. So again, thanks for joining, and here's to creating forever memories. Take care, everyone.